The security guard already had his hand on my arm when Victoria dropped the contract folder onto the glass tabletop with a crack. Her face had turned that particular shade of red that only shows up when rage and panic collide. "You leaked the Hartwell proposal," she said. "Not a question, an accusation. $50 million, Sloan. $50 million just walked out the door because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Here's the thing about being blamed for something you didn't do. Denying it sounds identical to admitting it. So I said nothing. I just watched her manicured finger jab toward the exit, watched her mouth form the words, 'You're done here.' Watched my entire career dissolve in the glass reflection of that conference room window. What Victoria didn't know, couldn't have known, was that my silence wasn't guilt. It was strategy. Before I get into what actually happened that day, I want to say something. We recently crossed our first subscriber milestone, and it genuinely means a lot. Now we're aiming for 2,000, and if this story hits close to home, if you've ever taken the blame for something bigger than you, hitting subscribe helps more than you'd think. I'm not asking for much, just your support as this community grows. Now let me properly introduce myself. I'm Sloan Westfield, and up until that moment in the conference room, I was senior contract analyst at Apex Solutions, one of Chicago's top consulting firms. 7 years there. I started as a junior associate and worked my way up through late nights, weekend proposal marathons, and an unreasonable amount of coffee. People tend to assume that making senior level by 32 means I had connections or some easy path. The truth is simpler and harder. I grew up watching my mom juggle 3 jobs just to keep our apartment on the south side of Chicago. Watched her smile at customers who looked right through her. Watched her count out pennies for my school supplies without ever once making me feel like we were struggling. She taught me something no MBA program could: how to actually see people. The janitor on our floor, the intern fetching coffee, the receptionist who knew everybody's business. I learned their names, remembered their kids' birthdays, asked how they were doing. Not as some calculated move, but because my mom taught me that everyone carrying a mop or a briefcase is carrying an entire world inside them. That kind of upbringing doesn't make you soft in the corporate world. It makes you dangerous because when you actually see people, you catch things other people miss. 3 months before Victoria fired me, a new client came through our doors. Hartwell Industries, a manufacturing giant looking to overhaul its entire supply chain. The kind of deal that could define a firm's whole year, maybe its whole trajectory, 50 million over 3 years with room to grow. Everybody wanted in on it. Victoria Chun, our VP of Strategic Accounts, was practically buzzing with ambition when she called me into her office that morning. "I'm assigning you to the Hartwell deal," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "I need your best work, Sloan. Everything perfect. No mistakes, no delays, and absolutely no information leaves this team." Understood. I understood more than she probably meant for me to. Victoria had been chasing a partnership for 2 years. This contract was her ticket, and she was trusting me to build it. That trust felt good. Earned even. The team was small: me, Victoria, 2 junior analysts named Blake and Jennifer, and our financial consultant Thomas Reeves. 5 people who knew every detail of the proposal taking shape for Hartwell. The work itself was delicate. Hartwell wanted innovation but demanded proven results. They wanted lower costs without sacrificing quality. Our proposal had to satisfy a dozen contradictory demands at once, and I spent weeks fine-tuning language to make that happen. Somewhere in those weeks, I noticed Thomas acting off. He'd always been quiet, brilliant with numbers, awkward with people, but suddenly he was taking calls in the stairwell, bolting out of meetings, showing up late with flimsy excuses about traffic or dentist visits. One night, around 9 p.m., I was alone in the office finishing up a section on logistics optimization. The floor was dark except for my desk lamp and the city glow through the windows. I got up to refill my water bottle and noticed light spilling from the copy room. Thomas was there, feeding pages into the scanner. That alone wasn't strange, we all scan things, but the way he kept glancing at the door, the slight tremor in his hands as he gathered the pages, that was. I didn't say anything. I just filed it away, the same way my mom taught me to notice when a regular customer suddenly seemed nervous or upset. Sometimes information is worth more when the other person doesn't know you're holding it. The next day I did something I'm not proud of. I checked the scanner's history log. We had access for document tracking purposes, so technically I wasn't breaking any rule. Technically. Thomas had scanned 47 pages the night before, at 9:17 p.m., and sent them to an outside email address. My stomach sank. I knew exactly what 47 pages meant. That was the precise length of our current Hartwell draft, pricing strategy and implementation timeline included. Now I had a decision to make: go straight to Victoria or dig deeper first. If I brought her nothing but a scanner log and a suspicious email, Thomas could easily explain it away. Maybe it was his personal account for working from home. Maybe he had some permission I didn't know about. Best case, I'd look paranoid. Worst case, accusatory. So I watched and I waited. Over the following week, Thomas made 3 more late-night scanning trips. Quietly logged each one. I also started tracking his calendar, his meeting patterns, the moments he seemed most distracted. And that's when I noticed the pattern. Every time Thomas had a dentist appointment or personal emergency, our competitor for the Hartwell deal, Titanium Group, had some kind of LinkedIn activity, new hire announcements, strategy updates, small things that meant nothing individually but added up to something once I put them together. Titanium was bidding on Hartwell too, and I was becoming more and more sure Thomas was feeding them our proposal in real time. The real question was why. Thomas made decent money, had 5 years at Apex, never showed a hint of dissatisfaction. People don't turn to corporate espionage without a reason. So I started digging through public records and social media on my lunch breaks, and that's when I found it. Thomas's sister, Emily Reeves, had been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma 8 months earlier. The medical bills, even with insurance, were staggering. He'd started a GoFundMe that barely made a dent. His parents had remortgaged their house. And then, 2 months ago, out of nowhere, the GoFundMe closed, fully funded. Emily was suddenly getting experimental treatment at a private facility running $40,000 a month. Somebody had handed Thomas serious money, and corporate espionage pays well when the contract on the table is worth $50 million. I felt sick. Not just from the betrayal, but because I understood it completely. If someone I loved was dying, and someone offered me a way to save them, how solid would my own principles really hold up? Understanding it didn't change what I had to do. It just meant I had to be smart about how I did it. I didn't go to Victoria yet. Instead, I took a risk. I built a fake version of the Hartwell proposal. Same formatting, same professional tone, but with key details altered. Pricing inflated by 15%, the implementation timeline stretched to suggest a slower rollout. Our innovation strategy shifted toward the areas where Titanium actually had an edge. Then I waited for Thomas to bite. It took 3 days. One Thursday, I left the office at 7 p.m., putting on a good show of exhaustion, complaining about needing real sleep. I circled the block twice, parked in the garage across the street, and watched our office windows from a coffee shop with a clean line of sight. At 8:45, the copy room light clicked on. Thomas working late again. I'd left the fake proposal on my desk, clearly labeled Hartwell, Final Draft, Confidential. If he was as desperate as I suspected, if Titanium was pressuring him for the finished product, he wouldn't resist. The next morning, the scanner log showed 53 pages sent to that same outside email at 9:02 p.m. He'd taken the bait. Thomas had just handed Titanium Group a proposal engineered to make their bid land wrong. Either overpriced, underpriced, or strategically misdirected. Now came the hard part. I had proof of Thomas's espionage, but also a problem. If I exposed everything immediately, the whole deal could still collapse. Hartwell might lose confidence in our security and walk away entirely. I needed to protect the contract while exposing the leak, and I needed to make sure Victoria never learned how close we'd come to disaster, because if she found out, she'd panic, and panic makes people do reckless things. So I made another gamble. I went straight to Hartwell, not to their CEO or procurement team, but to their head of security, a former FBI investigator named Angela Wu. I'd built some rapport with her during our early meetings, and I bet she'd rather get a quiet heads-up than deal with a public scandal. We met at a cafe in Lincoln Park, away from both our offices. "We have a situation," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was everything: the scanner logs, the timeline correlations, the evidence of Emily's treatment and Thomas's sudden financial windfall, and proof that Titanium had received our proposal. Angela's expression stayed flat as she read, though her jaw tightened. "You're telling me your competitor has been receiving your drafts for 2 months? Had been," I corrected. Past tense. The last thing they received was designed to mislead them. Their bid is going to be wrong. She studied me for a long beat. Why bring this to me instead of your VP? Because my VP is ambitious, and ambitious people make this about themselves. They see crisis as career damage. I needed someone who sees crisis as a problem to solve. I paused. And because Hartwell deserves to know that despite the breach, you're still getting our best work. The real proposal. The one Thomas never touched. That part was true. I'd kept the actual final draft on an encrypted drive, only touching it from home, never leaving it accessible at the office. Thomas had gotten early drafts but nothing from the last 3 weeks. Nothing that mattered. What do you want from me? Angela asked. 2 things. First, I want you to verify the breach yourself. Trace Titanium Group's bid development. See if it matches the false information Thomas sent them. Second, I want you to keep this quiet until after the contract is awarded. If this becomes public now, everyone loses. Except you, Angela said. You come out looking like the hero who saved the deal. I come out looking like someone who did her job, I corrected. The hero part is optional. She took the folder. I'll look into it. If you're right, we'll handle this appropriately. If you're wrong, if this is some kind of sabotage against a colleague, you'll wish you'd never approached me. Fair enough. 2 weeks later, Hartwell awarded Apex Solutions the $50 million contract. Our proposal had landed exactly as they wanted. Titanium's bid, from what I heard through industry backchannels, had come in strangely off-target, almost like they'd been working from stale or incorrect data. Victoria was thrilled. She took the whole team out for drinks, gave a speech about excellence and dedication, and dropped heavy hints about an upcoming partnership announcement. She thanked me by name, called me the backbone of the whole operation, said she couldn't have done it without me. Thomas looked ill the entire evening, barely touched his drink, left early citing a headache. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted and uneasy, because Angela Wu hadn't reached out since our meeting, and that silence felt like a bad sign. The answer came 3 days after the contract was signed. Victoria called an emergency meeting, just the core team, me, Thomas, Blake, and Jennifer, all sitting around the conference table confused. Victoria's face had gone pale. Hartwell's security team contacted me this morning. They found evidence that confidential details about our proposal were accessed by Titanium Group during the bidding process. Everyone's eyes darted around the room. Blake and Jennifer's confusion was genuine. They had no idea what was happening. Thomas looked like he might be sick. I kept my expression blank. Whatever Angela had found, she'd clearly decided to bring it forward. They're investigating the source of the leak, Victoria went on. They've assured me the contract isn't in jeopardy, but they need to understand how this happened. They'll be interviewing each of us individually. That's when I made a mistake, small but enough. I glanced at Thomas for a fraction of a second, and Victoria caught it, her eyes narrowing. The interviews took place over the next 2 days. When my turn came, I told the truth. I explained noticing Thomas's odd behavior, the scanner logs, my decision to build the false draft. I showed them everything I'd gathered. The investigator, not Angela, one of her colleagues, listened without reacting. Why didn't you report this to your supervisor immediately? Because I wasn't certain, I said. And because making an accusation without being certain would have damaged someone's career, possibly destroyed it. I needed to be sure. And when you were sure? I went to Angela Wu because I trusted her to handle it properly. Instead of going to Victoria Chun, your direct supervisor. Yes. Why? I picked my words carefully. Victoria had a significant personal stake in this contract's success. I believed she deserved to celebrate that success without the distraction of a security crisis that I'd already contained. Diplomatic, sure. The real truth was I didn't trust Victoria not to panic, not to make decisions that protected her own reputation over the integrity of the investigation. The investigator jotted something down. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Westfield. Thomas was gone within a week. Quietly. No announcement, just suddenly absent. The official line was that he'd decided to pursue other opportunities. The real story was a legal settlement that kept him out of prison in exchange for full cooperation and repayment. I assumed that was the end of it. Contract secured, lesson learned, time to move on. I was wrong. Victoria called me into her office on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after Thomas left. Her expression was strange, tight, controlled. Close the door, she said. I did. Hartwell's security team sent me their final report this morning. She tapped the folder on her desk. Very thorough, very detailed. That's good, I said carefully. Is it? Her voice had gone cold. Because the report makes it very clear that you knew about the breach for weeks. Weeks, Sloan, and you didn't tell me. There it was, the real issue. Not that a breach happened. Not that I'd resolved it. That I'd made decisions without her. That I'd gone over her head. I was handling it, I said. You were handling it, Victoria repeated, voice climbing. You were handling a situation that could have destroyed this contract, destroyed my career. And you decided I didn't need to know? The contract was never in jeopardy. I made sure of that. You made sure. She stood, palms flat on the desk. You're not the VP, Sloan. You're not the one who gets to make those calls. You violated protocol, you violated chain of command, and worst of all, you made me look incompetent to the client. That wasn't fair, and we both knew it. I made sure the client got what they paid for. That was my job. Your job is to do what I tell you to do, Victoria said. And there it was again, the real issue. Control. Authority. The fact that I'd solved a problem without needing her. The argument kept escalating from there. She accused me of grandstanding, of trying to make her look bad to boost my own position. I defended my choices, my methods, my results. Then she dropped the real threat. The client may trust you, Sloan, but I don't. Not anymore. The meeting that ended my job came 3 days later. Victoria had spent that time building her case, bringing in legal, shaping the story exactly how she wanted it told. The accusation that I had leaked the Hartwell proposal. Not Thomas. Me. Because I'd created the false draft, because I had access to everything, because my relationship with Hartwell's security team could be spun as suspicious. She twisted every piece of it. My diligence became deception. My protection of the contract became manipulation. My silence became guilt. You leaked the Hartwell proposal, she said in that conference room, witnesses present, HR taking notes. $50 million, Sloan. $50 million just walked out the door because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. It was absurd. The contract was already signed. Hartwell was satisfied. Thomas had already been identified and removed. But Victoria needed someone to blame for a breach that happened on her watch, and that someone couldn't be her. I could have fought it right there, called Angela Wu, pulled up the investigation report, made a scene. Instead, I let the security guard walk me out. Let Victoria believe she'd won. Let the company think I was the one responsible. Because what Victoria didn't know, couldn't have known, was that I'd recorded our entire argument in her office 3 days earlier. Illinois requires two-party consent for recordings, but company policy permitted recording any meeting where someone believed they might face disciplinary action. I'd also emailed myself before walking into her office that day, documenting my concerns, legal cover. More importantly, Angela Wu had already offered me a position at Hartwell Industries. Head of Internal Security Compliance, a real pay bump, a better title, and a direct line to people who actually valued integrity over ego. But I didn't take it right away. First, I filed a wrongful termination claim with the Illinois Department of Labor, attaching the recording, the investigation report, documentation of Thomas's firing, and a full timeline of everything Victoria had done. Then I went to Apex Solutions Board of Directors, not with threats, not with demands, just one simple question. Did they know their VP of Strategic Accounts had fired the person who saved their biggest contract, in order to bury her own security failures? They didn't know. They were very interested in finding out. Victoria was asked to resign within a month. Officially, pursuing new opportunities. In reality, it was a choice between quiet resignation and a very public firing. I could have felt vindicated, probably should have. Instead, I just felt sad. Victoria was genuinely talented at her job, but she'd been so focused on climbing that she'd forgotten the people holding the ladder steady. My mom always said how you treat people when you don't need them shows exactly who you are. Victoria treated me like a threat instead of an asset, and that choice cost her everything she'd built. I eventually took the job at Hartwell Industries. Once the dust settled, Angela Wu became more than a colleague. She became a mentor, teaching me the security side of corporate work with the same intensity she'd once brought to federal investigations. The department I built there became an industry model, Not because we were punitive or harsh, but because we understood something basic: security isn't about locks and cameras. It's about building an environment where people don't want to betray the company, where they're valued enough, paid enough, supported enough that selling secrets becomes unthinkable. Thomas's story never left me. A talented analyst pushed toward betrayal by impossible circumstances. The system failed him long before he failed the company. His sister survived. By the way, the experimental treatment worked. I know because I checked. I needed to know that some good had come out of all of it. I've thought a lot since then about the choices I made and whether they were the right ones. Going around Victoria was a gamble. The false proposal could have blown up in my face. Meeting Angela without authorization broke about a dozen unwritten rules. But those unwritten rules often exist to protect power structures, not people. And sometimes doing the right thing means breaking rules that shouldn't have existed in the first place. 5 years later, I'm VP of Corporate Integrity at Hartwell Industries. We've expanded past manufacturing into tech integration, renewable energy systems, and sustainable supply chains. The company's tripled in size, and every new contract, every new partnership, crosses my desk for security review. I still remember everyone's name, still ask about their kids, their lives, their worries, because my mom was right. Everyone is carrying a whole world inside them, and the moment you forget that is the moment you become someone who deserves to be fired. I heard Victoria landed at a smaller firm in Boston and is doing well. I hope that's true. I don't hate her. I understand her. She was shaped by a system that rewards ruthlessness and punishes vulnerability. Maybe she's learned something since. Maybe she hasn't. Either way, that's not my story to tell anymore. My story is about something else. It's about realizing that doing your job well sometimes means doing it differently than you were told to. It's about understanding that loyalty to a person isn't the same thing as loyalty to what's right. It's about knowing when to speak up and when to stay quiet, and having the judgment to tell the difference. The younger analysts on my team now sometimes ask for advice: how to navigate office politics, how to deal with a difficult boss, how to move up without compromising who they are. I tell them what my mom told me: see people. Really see them. Understand their motivations, their fears, the pressures they're under, not to manipulate them, but to deal with who they actually are instead of who you wish they were. I tell them that sometimes the person above you will make decisions out of ego instead of logic, and your job is to protect the work anyway, not for them but for everyone else depending on that work being done right. I tell them documentation is their best friend. Not because betrayal is inevitable, but because memory is unreliable, and the truth needs evidence. And I tell them that career growth built on someone else's downfall is a house of cards. Real success comes from creating value so undeniable that people want to see you rise. Most of all, I tell them that getting fired isn't always failure. Sometimes it's the universe's way of pushing you out of a place that was never going to appreciate who you really are. The Hartwell contract that started all of this is still active. Renewed twice now, expanded into new territory, over $200 million in total value when I review the numbers each quarter. I think about that conference room sometimes. Victoria's red face. Her accusation. The guard's hand on my arm. I think about how small and powerless I felt in that moment. And then I think about how that moment was actually the beginning, not the end. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it was fair or pleasant or justified, but because it forced me to bet on myself in a way I never had before. It taught me that the people who should value you will, and the ones who won't will always find a reason to tear you down. You can't control that. You can only control how you respond. My response was to build something better, a department, a philosophy, a way of working that puts people alongside profit. It's not revolutionary. It's just basic human decency applied to corporate structure. But in a world that too often forgets basic decency, that's revolutionary enough. If you've made it this far, if this story connected with you at all, I meant what I said at the start. We're building something here. A community of people who understand that work stories aren't only about work. They're about dignity, justice, and finding your way through systems that were never designed with you in mind. Subscribing helps this reach more people, and helps us grow toward that 2,000 subscriber goal and beyond. The choice is yours, but I hope you'll join us.